Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut EP from Gabbie Hanna called 2-Way Mirror. You know, if you're surprised that I'm covering this project, you haven't been paying attention. Because I've mentioned before that I've watched Gabbie Hanna for some time now, for at least a couple of years. And I actually got into her content well before she started making music at all. Now, you might be wondering why on earth I'm watching it. I'm clearly not her target demo in any criteria, but I've always been curious about framing, fostering a relationship with one's audience. And for Gabbie's brand of content to have survived so much, that does speak to her tenacity and her work ethic. That being said, I've been on the fence about some of her musical ambitions for some time now, mostly because she doesn't seem to cleanly fit into an easy box within the mainstream, and I question how much she should even go in that direction. She certainly has the presence and the charisma and the look of a pop act, especially given her commitment to dance, but you can also tell that her other natural talents don't really seem to fit in that lane. For one, there's her voice, which has a rougher, throatier edge that I've always been convinced would be a much better fit for rock or punk or emo, and that's not even taking into account her style of writing, which has a level of intricacy and poetry that'd be a natural fit for an act like Jetty Bones or Say Anything, or even the old school emo rap set. I remember hearing her roast herself the second time and then being reminded of cadences from Sage Francis or Atmosphere, and that's high praise I will rarely ever give. So packaging her into a mainstream accessible pop package when mainstream pop music is currently at one of its weakest points, it kind of worried me that she'd play to a sound that was accessible now but not the most flattering to her strengths long term. And given that she has a built-in die-hard audience, she doesn't really need to cater to that mainstream. That being said, I remember being pleasantly surprised by Emma Blackery when I reviewed her last year, so alright, what do we get from Gabbie on 2-Way Mirror? Okay, so this might sound a little bit weird, but this review almost feels too easy for me to put together, mostly because 2-Way Mirror sounds exactly like I would have expected from its lead-off singles and the pop direction that Gabbie's chasing. And as such, I'd like to think that this is pretty good. Absolutely flawed and not great, and we'll be discussing why shortly, but the more listens I gave it, the more I was absolutely convinced it should be a little bit better, and that's even beyond the creative decisions where I feel that Gabbie's not flattering her strongest assets. If anything, the most stark criticism is that it hews a little closer to conventionality than it needs to, wearing its influences a little bit too prominently and sounding a little bit compromised in order to avoid shocking or alienating a wider mainstream pop crowd. But that's also what you would expect from a first-time EP from an artist that's outside the label model, so while I'm not going to give her a pass, I do understand it. So you know what? Let's start off by talking about some of those influences, which come through most strongly in the composition and the production. Now, my immediate comparison point was that this album sounds like a split between Jetty Bones' Hyphen and October's Ultra Red. But those are both indie projects, and Gabbie's talked about her idols in music before. So when I hear the classical, more delicately arranged passages in a very prim, slightly throaty delivery, and then remember hearing that Gabbie Hanna is like Julia Michaels in the past, well, yeah, it makes sense. Same with the broad sense of theatricality and the slightly manic undercurrent that shows her fondness for Brendan Urie. If you know what you're listening for, it is pretty obvious. Now, that's not a bad thing. I dare say I enjoyed this EP more than Panic at the Disco's last album, and certainly more than anything Julia Michaels has ever released. But in Urie's case, you're seeing an act that has gotten progressively less interesting the more pop he's gone, and there's a similar air of compromise when it comes to the sounds of this EP. Now, there are some moments that are distorted and sound a little bit heavier, the whirring grind of Broken Girls, the ominous minor chord shifts across the pre-chorus of Pillowcase that actually sound really cool, the fact that I kept expecting Medicate to really explode vocally instead of plugging in a squonking drop that honestly kind of detracts from a good song. Then you get the pseudo dubstep warp of the synths on Goodbye for Now that's probably a little overmixed. And you know what, maybe it was a question of just slimming down the arrangement and not quite nailing the crescendo to get it to really hit, but I did expect Gabbie to have at least one moment that felt genuinely shocking or raw, and I didn't really get it. Now, the closest I came to getting genuinely surprised was the faster pace, borderline Broadway-esque cadence on the breakdown of Perfect Day, A True Story, but that's created more through contrast and pacing, not really through the production on the track, which is still pretty conventional. Now, I could be harsh and say that a more diverse and expanded instrumental palette that may be called upon rock or emo might have worked better in order to match her tone and delivery, but I'd actually argue it's simpler than that. I don't think her vocal production allowed her to get as raw as she really could to sell these moments. For the most part, she's mixed right at the very front of the mix, allowing a lot of focus on her precise vocal control of her throatier tones. But whenever you can tell that she's stepping out of that range to maybe get a little bit louder or rougher, her vocal placement slides right back and the reverb piles in. I don't know, maybe it was an issue of mic technique and smoothing out some sharp patches. Maybe somebody got spooked after her peaking sharp in the Monster Genius video went viral and then assumed that your average consumer wouldn't notice the production correction. And let's be honest, they probably won't. But for me, it did get distracting. And more to the point, it feels unnecessary if the appearance of refinement matters more than that emotional core, which could afford to get more raw, especially in mainstream 2010s pop. And yet again, I get it. If you're making pop with a theatrical bent, you want to have the veneer to be preserved and polished. And even if I would argue that Gabbie is far more expressive and potent mid-breakdown on these songs than with a ton of polish, I get going for this tone if she wants mainstream accessibility and success. But it's not as unique as it could be. I've heard a lot of mainstream pop in the 2010s that is otherwise compromised on its groove try to work off hitting a balance between exposed edges and a more polished melodic framework. And more to the point, her style of writing can fit within this theatricality as well as more stripped back and raw emo that flatters her. And you know what? If I'm going to give Gabbie any praise here anywhere, it really is in the writing. Now again, structurally, I could point out that this project is not at all surprising, especially coming from her. It's set mid-breakup, the vocal snippets are given their own track number and placement, and there is a narrative flow to the EP that feels emotionally consistent and nuanced. And the best element here is the framing. 2-Way Mirror is a pretty apt title because for as much as she will accuse her partner of being emotionally manipulative, lightly toxic, needy, and then cheating to boot, she's also self-aware enough to realize that she wants some of the same things and will even play into the self-destructive impulses in order to satisfy them. Hell, she follows broken girls and it's call out of the guys that want to play hero with her with broken boys, highlighting a similar attraction to damaged people that she knows about herself. And then she'll follow up with a real emotional crisis of Butterflies, where she has every reason to believe that this is gonna go wrong, but instead of addressing how healthy pursuing self-sabotage is and its roots, she chooses to place it in her art instead. She writes the song. And I like how she's aware of the selfish, almost calculating impulse that drives that pursuit, and how it can lead to being reckless and emotionally demanding, to say nothing of second-guessing every possibility of something going right in her relationship. And that's also one reason why Medicate kind of works on this EP. The obvious point is taking drugs to become less of yourself in order to escape pain and your own bad decisions and vices. But what I find more intriguing is the line, "Make your tragedies a work of art," which provides a similar sort of emotional distance in order to contextualize them and compartmentalize them. Now the follow-up point is that self-awareness might explain being toxic, but it doesn't really excuse it, which is why this album has to end in the hard breakup, and I like the little details across Goodbye for Now that highlight how this was probably never gonna work, at least for her in this emotional state. On the first verse, she admits that she doesn't really know him that well, which actually makes sense because she was self-focused entering this relationship for all the wrong reasons, not willing to give, only to take for her art. And while that doesn't let him off the hook, the EP gives him the apology and the final word, even if the abrupt ending to the song and the final coda imply a sharper and likely more permanent break. The EP is over. She needs him no longer. Okay, that's callous, but there is a note of truth that comes with it, especially given how that style of this EP is so theatrical and measured. And in a sense, that can be a problem. The framing and writing of this album imply that the composition should sound more tangled and raw and explosive, and yet I'm left with the feeling that this album is produced to sound more composed and small and accessible than it really is. Yeah, the reverb tricks being pulled on butterflies are more effective than I expected, and I like the subtle drippy effects around the pulsating groove of Pillowcase, one of the few songs on this album that has a groove, but this is a project that could have afforded to get much rougher or ramp up the pure pop melodrama in which Gabbie's writing would be punching above its weight class. But you know what? I can't judge this project based off of what it could have been, which I imagine at its peak would sound more like Phantoms by Mariana's Trench from this year, a style which I think Gabbie could pull off and probably isn't even in her wheelhouse, and instead of what it actually is. And that is generally pretty good. I'm not sure the aesthetic choices entirely flatter her or the writing, but there is an intricacy and enough of a distinctive flair that makes her music stand out. It certainly sounds better than whatever Halsey puts out in a similar lane, where her angst sounds focus group, sterile, and with even worse production. So yeah, for me, you know what? This is getting an extremely light 7 out of 10. Absolutely recommended for the Gabbie Show fans, and for everyone else, you know what, if you're curious and willing to pay attention to the details, I think you'll like this. There's enough rewarding moments. And as for Gabbie herself, well, she saw herself in that two-way mirror. You actually got a lot out of it. Now I want to see her break that mirror, and then maybe see herself in those shards. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, in the case that Gabbie sees this, or Gabbie fans see this more likely, just take it easy. I did really want to like this, and I do like it. I just think that she's better off in a slightly different lane. And I hope that didn't completely color the review, because again, the writing is really damn good. But again, it's stylistic choices that I think could have been a little bit more refined. And let me say this, I'm happy she did this outside of the major label architecture, because half the choices that she made with this project would have never flown in that system. But hey, if you want to buy or stream it, links down there below, and I got the poll up there for y'all to tell me how wrong I am. Looking forward to it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for new and old episodes of Billboard Breakdown, they are on the new channel. Link is in the card right over here. But hey, till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.